A bill in Argentina to allow the Macri administration to increase the country's foreign debt, plus millions march in Brazil to defend democracy. Thanks so much for joining us for teleSur's English. I'm Coddy Weddle, and this is From the South. In Argentina, the Senate has passed into law a bill that allows the government to strike a deal with the vulture fund creditors. Now, this will give President Mauricio Macri the possibility to increase the country's foreign debt and up to $15 million. From Buenos Aires, now our correspondent Laureano Ponce reports.
12-hour-long debate, the Argentine Senate has passed into law the bill aimed at reaching an agreement between President Macri's government and the vulture funds. This means the government will be authorized to increase the foreign debt in $12 to $15 billion.
Most of the senators respond to their provinces. If the provincial governors who handle their local economies can get more affordable credits, and they are demanding that, why would we say no?
Despite the significant rejection that the Argentine people has shown to the agreement with the hedge funds, almost two-thirds of the senators have supported the government's initiative.
This is positive. We will support the bill. We believe this is good for the country. This is a decision we had to make. And no matter who won the election, they were going to take it, because the country had no other alternative.
On the other hand, 19 senators from the opposition had anticipated they would vote against the deal, which they consider a path towards increasing foreign debt with no benefits for the working families of the country.
This government lacks an economic development project, which would need to be based on the domestic market and on popular consumption, like the previous government. This government is pure and exclusively looking to increase foreign debt, and the condition for that is to strike a deal with these funds.
According to opposite sectors, the increases in foreign debt are in line with the neoliberal views of the Macri administration that seek to favor the financial powers at the expense of the majority. Laureano Ponce, teleSur, Buenos Aires.
Over 20,000 people have already been laid off in Argentina since the Macri administration began, and now a new price hike is causing concerns there. The government announced an increase in bus, train, and metro prices. The new hike comes after increases in prices of gas and electricity. The opposition has announced a new bill to prevent looming layoffs in the public sector. And meanwhile, hundreds of culture workers gathered last night outside the Ministry of Culture in support of their laid-off colleagues. So far, the Macri administration has fired 500 people from that ministry. The workers, in many cases, have been fired without a formal explanation.
They limited us from expressing our position, our opinion on social media regarding the government's policies. They are building a scheme of systematic violence because the layoffs don't stop. It began with the new government. They did not tell us anything. They did not tell us where we were going to be assigned. They didn't give us any task and just fire us.
Marches in support of the government of Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff are taking place right now in Brazil's major cities. Worker unions and social movements are demanding respect for Brazil's democracy as the lower house continues with its impeachment efforts against the president. The protests are also symbolic since today marks the 52nd anniversary of the 1964 coup d'etat. And earlier today, a group of Brazilian artists and intellectuals showed their support for President Dilma Rousseff while warning that the opposition is taking steps that undermine democracy. During the meeting, President Rousseff explained that the impeachment commission is trying to charge her with corruption over the 2015 budget, yet the government's budget report to the comptroller is due for April. Interpol has removed Colombia's National Liberation Army from its most wanted list. With more information, we turn to our correspondent, Natalia Margarita, in Colombia.
Colombia is now one step closer to peace. That was the reaction among many Colombians to the announcement of the beginning of formal peace talks between the government and the National Liberation Army, or ELN, the second largest guerrilla in the country.
This is historic news. It was a fundamental requirement for the process of the construction of peace and was as well what many sectors of the Colombian society were demanding: arguing that it was not possible to think about a comprehensive peace without reaching agreements with both active guerrilla groups, the FARC and the ELN.
As the continuous progress in the ongoing negotiations with the FARC in Havana was drawing thousands in support of peace, the civil society pressure for peace talks with the ELN equally increased.
The launching of these peace talks is to a certain extent a consequence of the continuing demand from diverse sectors, highlighting the importance of social and popular participation in the process of the construction of peace.
The participation of civil society is at the center of the six-point agenda that the government and the ELN chief negotiators presented today. Both parties have been constructing this agenda for 2 years, when exploratory and confidential talks began in January 2014.
Colombian society will now have a platform to push forward their agendas. The ELN has been known for demanding an end to the conflict from the national government and demanding that society plays a leading role, and I think this is going to be a very special and extremely timely opportunity.
Lawmakers and peace advocates didn't take too long to publicly express their unconditional support for the negotiations with the ELN. That was during a press conference that came shortly after the announcement. Natalia Margarita, TeleSur, Bogotá, Colombia.
Former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori has been taken to the hospital after suffering from dizzy spells. The lawyers of the former head of state, who is serving 25 years in prison for corruption and crimes against humanity, have continuously argued that their client should not serve jail time due to his failing health. And dozens protested in Lima against the presidential campaign of Keiko Fujimori. The protests are demanding the National Electoral Board disqualify Fujimori from the race for vote buying and other illegal campaign practices. However, others still remember the ruthless legacy of her father's government.
Because of the mutilations and genocides during the dictatorship, the government of Alberto Fujimori, with the First Lady, who was Keiko Fujimori, she was an accomplice of this government. We can't allow her to win.
And in Mexico now, impunity and corruption in the state of Veracruz are back in the spotlight. Our correspondent Clayton Kahn now reports from Mexico.
Anger has been mounting in Mexico over the course of the past week over the story of the so-called Los Porquis, a hashtag that has gained momentum in social network sites. Now, Los Porquis refers to a group of 4 young men accused of kidnapping and raping women in the Gulf Coast violence-stricken state of Veracruz. The youth have been identified to be the sons of wealthy businessmen or politicians. Now, Veracruz state prosecutors have been denounced for not investigating the possible rape cases, prompting rights defenders to declare that impunity or organized crime continues to dominate the state. Now, families of other alleged rape victims are also beginning to now speak out of other cases. Now, the story emerges as 8 municipal police were detained in the town of Papantla this week, accused of forced disappearance of 3 youth, and a local activist, Claudia Vera, who denounced corruption in the state's many other cases of disappearances, was reportedly kidnapped by an armed group this Monday. This is Clayton Kahn reporting for teleSur's here in Mexico City.
In 2 weeks' time, supporters of the revolution in Venezuela will be holding a national congress to discuss the way forward. At a factory near Caracas, young workers gathered to discuss their ideas for dealing with the challenges facing the country after the opposition won control of the National Assembly. They called on President Nicolás Maduro not to ratify what they called anti-worker laws passed by the new parliament. Ian Bruce was there.
We're here in the industrial zone of Guatire, just outside Caracas, and you can hear the noise over here of one of the preparatory meetings for the big national congress, the Congreso de la Patria, that's going to be taking place here in Venezuela in just 2 weeks' time. You can see here there are workers from different sectors gathered here. They've spent all day debating their proposals for how to confront the economic and political problems that the Bolivarian revolution is facing. We'll be following this process over the next 2 weeks here on teleSur. Ian Bruce, teleSur, Caracas.
An overpass under construction has collapsed, killing at least 14 people in the city of Kolkata, India. Nearly 100 people have been injured, and many are trapped under the rubble there. The overpass has been under construction since 2009. Safety issues such as lack of inspections and the use of substandard materials have plagued construction projects in India. A car bomb killed 7 police officers and wounded around 24 people in Turkey. A parked car on a busy street in Diyarbakir was laden with explosives. As a minibus carrying police officers turned the corner, the explosion was detonated by remote control. Around 24 people were injured. A UN tribunal has acquitted Serbian politician Vojislav Šešelj of war crimes and crimes against humanity during the 1990s wars. The 3-judge panel found by a majority that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond all reasonable doubt or provide sufficient evidence that Šešelj was responsible for the crimes of which he was charged. Serbia's legal advisor says he is surprised by the verdict.
A little bit surprised with that outcome of this case, particularly having in mind that he spent more than 11 years and 8 months in the detention of the ICTY. Today he is acquitted, and even more, we heard today by the presiding judge certain serious critics to the work of the prosecution in this case. The government of the Republic of Serbia would not comment in any way this judgment.
The Prime Minister of Iraq named Nisar Salam al-Numan as a candidate for the key post of oil minister. Now, this is part of a cabinet reshuffling aimed at fighting corruption in the country. The Prime Minister merged several portfolios and presented a list of 16 ministers. However, he kept the current defense and interior ministers. Hundreds of thousands of people turned out for nationwide protests in France against recently proposed labor reforms. Police clashed with protesters and arrested more than 100 people. The government says the reforms making it easier to lay off workers will boost the economy by encouraging firms to hire more staff. However, they have been opposed by students and unions who say it will strip away vital protections. A court in Brussels has approved the extradition to France of Salah Abdeslam, a suspect in the November 13th Paris attacks. Now, according to Abdeslam's lawyer, he agreed to be transferred after his arrest earlier this month. Belgian and French authorities will now consider how to proceed with the extradition. Lebanese forces will receive another $29 million in aid for training. The announcement was made by British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond during a visit to the country. Fighting between Islamic State group militants and al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front militants often overlaps Lebanon's northern border with Syria. Sweden's Landvetter airport was evacuated earlier today after 2 suspicious packages were found. The packages were discovered after the airport received a bomb threat. However, the packages did not contain any dangerous objects, and the terminal was subsequently reopened. A 55-year-old Italian nurse was arrested on suspicion of murdering 13 elderly patients in the intensive care ward where she had worked for decades. The police have dubbed her the hospital ward killer. She remains unidentified, but police say she administered lethal doses of a blood thinner drug into her victims' intravenous drips. 5 members of the Women's World Cup champion United States team have filed a complaint against the U.S. Soccer Federation. Now, the complaint comes as the women's team was only awarded $2 million after winning the World Cup, while the men's team was awarded $9 million after the last 2014 World Cup. The players consider the allocation of money evidence of sexism. And students of computer science at the Albrecht University were allowed to play large-scale classic video games such as Tetris or Snake. The light panel there that you're seeing was built with almost 60,000 LED bulbs. The students who designed the panel spent 5,000 hours to complete the project. And everybody around that building obviously got a little bit of a show as they played the game there. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to follow us on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you back here tomorrow.